Hey, welcome into the Whistle Stop. He is the voice of the referees, Elliot. He is the voice of the players, Andrew. I am just here. The big controversial thing, guys, that is floated out into the ether is the blue card. This new thing being injected into the game, allegedly, possibly soon by some of the larger confederations talking about it for really the first time ever. We've heard this kind of concept thrown out, and it obviously plays out a little bit at the rec level. Elliot, let's start with you. Let's break this down. So a blue card, kind of flesh this out for us, the people that are just kind of hearing this, not understanding exactly what that means.
Okay, so by way of background, the aim behind all of this is to try and deter and punish things that we don't want in the game, specifically dissent and cynical fouls. So that's the necessary aim. And then it's how do we achieve that? So currently, dissent, cynical fouls, yellow cards. And the concern is that it's insufficient punishment, that it's not enough of a deterrence and it's not enough of a punishment, and it's still an issue in the game and it hasn't gone away. So it's about finding a rule or a policy or a practice that will achieve the aim to diminish dissent and cynical fouls in a proportional way. So not going over the top, not to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. You could come up with a rule that says, right, dissent, red card, 3-match ban, a month's wages, and a 2-point penalty for the team. Well, that for sure would deter dissent, but it would be disproportionate. On the other hand, if you have no rules in force, then it's going to get out of control. So what's being proposed by IFAB is blue cards. It's specifically for dissent and cynical fouls. If a player is guilty, they're shown a blue card, and that will result in a sin bin, a temporary time penalty for that player, where in the case of a 90-minute game, a player would sit out for 10 minutes. The team would play down for that duration, and then the player would be allowed back in. It would allow for mixing and matching of cards, so that yellow plus yellow would equal red, yellow plus blue would equal red for the same player, and blue plus blue would equal red for the same player. So that's the background. IFAB are not just throwing this new rule into the game. What they've done over the last couple of years is introduced it at grassroots in certain places around the world. UK is one of them. So they're using grassroots to test it. They're getting feedback. The next step would be to test it at a slightly higher level of competition, whether that's FA Cup or Women's FA Cup or Women's Champions League. I've heard a few of those competitions mentioned. And then you keep shooting bullets and then wait and see. So that's where we're at right now.
Andrew, let's bring you in on this one. I mean, just kind of your general thoughts on this being implemented. Let's start with the kind of at a lower rec level, implementing something like this. How do you think this would go? What are your thoughts generally on this?
It's something that it already does exist in the recreational soccer. A lot of it's indoors, at least here in America. There's a lot of indoor facilities that use, I think, I don't know if it's always called blue card, but sometimes you call it like an orange card or something.
Yeah, and the indoor field's already set up like a hockey rink, so might as well go with their rules, right?
Exactly. Yeah, indoor soccer basically is hockey on turf. So it already does exist. I haven't officiated any indoor myself, so I don't want to speculate too much on whether that's been beneficial to indoor or not. But at the rec level, I think I have two thoughts. One is adding more laws is going to be difficult for officials at that level to absorb and implement efficiently and successfully. So part of me is a little skeptical on adding more layers to what they have to process already, especially when you already do have a yellow card, which can essentially do a lot of the same things. My other thought, though, is I think every sport has to evolve or die. You have to continue to progress. Society's not going to stand still just for the sake of a certain sport. A lot of people right now are upset because they don't want anything in soccer to change. They stop tinkering with the game, yada yada. I think that's a really naive approach. I think you have to. It's worth at least trialing. How that affects the lower levels, I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much. I think it could be useful, but a little hesitant to add too much more to the plate of some of our officials.
Elliot, I mean, adding something like this at the professional level seems kind of wild. I mean, your take on all of that?
It's a big change for sure. One of the biggest changes that we've had for a long time, and I think Andrew's right. You need to be open to change and ready to evolve, but at the same time, do it in a cautious way and be ready for unintended consequences. So there's been a comparison made with rugby union where sin bins have been around for a while and they are effective. They're effective because it's been one of the reasons why they have less of a dissent issue. And also playing a player down in rugby can have a real negative impact. There's a lot more ways to score in rugby, a penalty, a try. And so playing a player down can really affect your team. You want to avoid it. One of the counterpoints made to that is that doesn't equate to football. In football, if you're reduced to 10 men for 10 minutes, you'll adopt negative tactics. You'll kill time. You'll drag out every throw in, every free kick, every goal kick. You'll put men behind the ball knowing that your player is back on in 3 minutes, now 2 minutes, and it could turn the game into a little bit of a negative spectacle. Mm-hmm. So that's a possible unintended consequence of a sin bin. And it's hard to know exactly what that's going to look like until we trial it. So I'm interested to see what the games look like at the grassroots level and at high level of competition as well. There have been a lot of innovations over the years, and yellow cards and red cards, they were invented. We didn't have them. And then, so they came about in the 1966 World Cup. There was a game where Bobby Charlton and Jack Charlton, two brothers that, they look similar. This was before yellow and red cards had been invented. It turned out after the game, each of those players had been booked, and the England camp, the coaches, they hadn't known it during the game. It got reported in the newspapers that they'd been booked, and so the problem became obvious. How do we communicate cautions and red cards? So this English referee, Ken Aston, he was sitting in his car in traffic, looking at traffic lights as they changed from red to orange to green, and the light bulb went off. So orange was warning and red was see you later, you're off. Now the difference there is, yes, he invented red and yellow cards, but we weren't creating cautions and we weren't creating dismissals. They already existed. The cards were there to just improve the communication of what was already there. Blue cards, it's different. It's a new rule. It will have an impact that's quite hard to predict. And there's been quite a lot of concern among stakeholders in the game, players, ex-players, coaches, ex-coaches, people in the media. They're very concerned about tinkering with something that isn't broken. And I'm just wondering whether there isn't a lesser way of achieving the same end, whether it's at a high level, miking referees up so that communication between the referee and players, it's more transparent, and players have got nowhere to hide if they come out and dissent. That could be a deterrent. And it could be a question of training our referees to a greater extent on how to use the yellow card to consistently and effectively punish dissent. No, it means post-match reporting for them, and they don't want to do it. So either they don't give the yellow card on the game where it's warranted, or they do give the yellow card and then it isn't reported, and then the dissent continues with the referee having to handle that same team next week. So I wonder if the current laws of yellows is maybe there isn't an issue with it. We just need to apply it better, what we've already got.
You mentioned at the grassroots level in England, they're already kind of using a similar kind of sin bin setup. You're reffing at that level right now and doing some of those games. What has been the reaction? What has been kind of the takeaway of how that's been implemented so far?
Mixed. And I mean, I've got a very anecdotal example. So when I just came back to London before Christmas, I went to a local field where there was an adult 11-a-side game going on, and the referee was handing out, it wasn't a blue card, but it was a yellow card with a sin bin. So there were 3 or 4 sin bins in a game, and I struck up a couple of conversations with the players on the touchline and the coaches, asking them for just their experience of how the sin bins have impacted on Dissent in the last couple of years. And they said, "Oh, it's made no difference. It's had no impact." Now that's one example. That's just a couple of conversations. I don't know how reliable that data is or how widely reflected that is across the board. But their view was that sin bins were not a deterrent. It wasn't stopping people dissenting towards the referee at all. My experience of the kind of recreational leagues that Andrew's talking about, leagues like Gotham and similar, where I've used temporary suspensions for players, and I found that it's effective. It does create another nuance in the game that can lead to more inconsistency. So I guess that's a risk. So yes, it could reduce dissent if done well. It could be another cause of contention. Why did this referee give a player a sin bin and versus this one that didn't? So yeah, it's if done right, it could be effective, but not without its issues in implementing it.
Andrew, you mentioned it a little bit about just kind of at the rec level, adding that on to kind of the plate for referees. For Gotham, is this something you see us adopting at any point, especially if it kind of becomes a more universal IFAB rule? Or is this something that may not be for us?
At Gotham, our approach is to keep things simple. So I think initially this isn't something we're going to jump on and immediately start implementing, because it certainly doesn't keep things simple. However, we do like to mirror most of our laws right off of IFAB. It's easier for referees to follow what they already know. I personally don't believe it benefits us to do a lot of tinkering on our own. If this is something that becomes standard across the sport, I think it's certainly something Gotham would likely follow. So I think the short answer is it's certainly not on our radar to implement right now, but wouldn't rule against it forever. It's something that we could certainly look at as it becomes standardized. If it becomes standardized, I could easily see this not making it past the trial stage. Personally, I think they have kind of the right idea. Dissent is a real problem, which is something we need to point out. Dissent is a massive issue. It's really only appearing to get worse, not better. So all of the pundits and all of the whatever you want to call them on Twitter just screaming at the void about how you can't tinker with the sport, yada yada. This is ridiculous. I don't think they understand. And there's a lot of comments being like, why would IFAB do this? Like, who told them to do this? Where does this come from? It comes from referees getting fed up with abuse. That's where it comes from. And that's important to point out. So anything that could potentially help with that is something we should consider doing, and IFAB should consider doing. And I don't necessarily think blue cards is the right mechanism, but I think their intention is really good, and that's something everyone seems to be looking past. They're they're trying to improve the game. They're trying to give referees another tool to improve the game and to it's a referee shortage across the entire world, let alone the United States. And helping referees helps the game. So it helps everyone. So the intent is good. I like the intent.
If you see something dodgy on a game you're watching on TV, or if something frustrates you in your own local match, send it in to us. We will chop it up and break it down right here on the Whistle Stop.